The sky over the alien world was heavy with dark clouds. Ethan had been walking along the edge of a wide silver river, carrying only a small pack and his old jacket. He was far from any human settlement, deep in the wetlands that locals called the Shimmering Plains. The air was cool and damp, the ground soft under his boots. At first, the sound of water had been peaceful, a steady flow that matched his quiet steps. But then, the wind began to rise, and the river started to roar. Thick rain fell from the sky, cold and sharp like tiny knives. The calm silver river turned into a raging, brown flood, carrying branches, stones, and broken logs. Ethan pulled his jacket tighter, trying to keep the water from soaking through. He thought about finding shelter, maybe an overhanging rock or a fallen tree. But before he could move, he heard something through the storm, a sound that made him stop and turn. It was faint, but it cut through the noise of the rain and the river. It was a cry, high-pitched and trembling. It sounded like a child. Ethan's heart quickened. The cry came again, louder this time. Followed by the splashing of water, he ran toward the sound, pushing through tall wet grass that whipped against his legs. As he reached the edge of the river, lightning split the sky. For a brief moment, the scene lit up bright as day. In the middle of the raging water, clinging to a broken wooden raft, was a tiny figure. The figure's skin shimmered like polished silver, glowing faintly even in the storm. Long strands of hair clung to her face, plastered by the rain, her wide, frightened eyes locked on Ethan's. Even from a distance, she was no human child. She was alien. The raft spun wildly, carried by the current toward a place where the river narrowed into a deadly drop. The roar of the waterfall was now louder than the thunder. Without thinking, Ethan threw his pack onto the bank. He kicked off his heavy boots and dived into the freezing water. The cold struck him like a wall, making it hard to breathe. But he pushed forward, forcing his arms and legs to move against the current. Rain pounded on the back of his head. The river tried to pull him under, twisting and dragging. He kept his eyes on the girl, who clung desperately to the raft. Her small hands were slipping on the wet wood. She cried out again, her voice almost lost in the chaos. Ethan reached her just as the raft hit a swirling current. The wood cracked and began to break apart. The girl's grip slipped, and she fell toward the water. Ethan lunged, his fingers closing around her wrist. Her skin was smooth and cold, the strange faint glow still there under the rain. She clung to him with surprising strength for someone so small. He pulled her close, feeling her arms locked tightly around his neck. The current fought them, spinning them toward the waterfall. Ethan kicked hard, aiming for the riverbank. Every muscle burned, and the cold bit deep into his bones. He kept his head above water, lifting the girl higher so she could breathe. Branches and debris smashed into his side, but he ignored the pain. A few more desperate strokes brought them near the muddy bank. With a final push, he got one hand onto solid ground, pulling himself and the girl out of the river. They collapsed together on the wet grass, gasping for air. Rain still poured down, soaking them both. The girl's glowing skin shimmered faintly in the gray light. She coughed, spitting out water, and then looked up at him. Her eyes were large and bright, with pupils shaped like tiny stars. "Please, don't leave," she whispered in broken human speech. Her voice was weak but desperate. Ethan stared at her, wondering how she could speak his language at all. Before he could answer, she grabbed his jacket and pulled it close around her. She was shivering hard, her small frame trembling against him. Ethan glanced toward the river. The broken raft had already disappeared over the falls. If he had been 1 minute later, she would have been gone. The thought sent a shiver through him, one that had nothing to do with the cold. In the distance, through the sheets of rain, he noticed movement in the sky. Dark shapes were flying low, scanning the river. They weren't birds. They were mechanical drones, their red lights cutting through the mist. Ethan felt the girl press closer to him, hiding her face in his chest. Whoever was looking for her, she clearly didn't want to be found. He realized then that saving her might have just pulled him into something far more dangerous than a storm. The rain had not stopped, but the roar of the waterfall was now far behind them. Ethan crouched under a cluster of low trees, trying to shield the girl from the cold wind. Her small silver hands were still clutching his jacket, like she feared he would vanish if she let go. He tried to loosen her grip gently, but she only held tighter. Her head rested against his chest, and he could feel the uneven rhythm of her breathing. She was shaking, not just from the cold, but from something deeper. Fear. He spoke softly, telling her it was all right, telling her she was safe now, but she only whispered one thing in return: "Don't leave. Please." Her voice was so small that it was almost lost in the sound of the rain. Ethan studied her more closely. Her glowing silver skin looked almost transparent, as if light lived just beneath the surface. Her long hair, pale like moonlight, stuck to her face in wet strands, and on her wrists, faint markings pulsed softly, like tiny rivers of light flowing under her skin. He had never seen anything like it. They were not scars, not tattoos, but something alive, the girl noticed. Him looking and quickly pulled her sleeves down. "Hunters. We'll see the mark," she whispered. Ethan's brow furrowed. Before he could ask what she meant, the sound of a faint hum came from the distance. The drones. He saw 3 of them sweeping low over the flooded grasslands, red sensors scanning the ground. The girl's breathing grew faster, her grip on him tightening like a vice. Ethan realized that if they stayed where they were, the drones would find them easily. He told her they had to move, but she shook her head. "I can't walk far," she said, her voice trembling. Without hesitation, he lifted her into his arms. She was light, far lighter than a human child her size. Her arms looped around his neck, her head pressing against his shoulder. He moved quickly but kept low, using the tall grasses cover. Each step made the mud suck at his boots, slowing him down. The girl never loosened her hold. Her body pressed so close it was as if she wanted to disappear into him. When the hum of the drones grew louder, Ethan froze. One of the machines was hovering only a few meters away, its red light sweeping across the wet ground. He crouched, hiding behind a half-fallen tree. Rain dripped steadily from the branches above, masking some of the sound of their breathing. The girl leaned close to his ear and whispered something strange. "In my people's way, you saved me, so I am yours. Forever." Ethan didn't know what to say to that. He didn't even understand what forever meant in her world. But there was no time to think about it. The drone moved closer, the red light brushing over the tree trunk they hid behind. Ethan's muscles tensed, ready to run, but then the drone turned away, drifting toward the river. Ethan waited until the hum faded before standing again. He started moving toward the thicker part of the wetlands. The rain had eased slightly, but mist clung low to the ground, making it hard to see far ahead. After a while, he found a shallow path of firmer ground leading away from the river. It was narrow, bordered by tall reeds swaying in the wind. The girl's head lifted slightly, and she pointed weakly toward the path. "Safe way." "Maybe," she murmured. Ethan followed it, his steps quiet and careful. He didn't know where it would lead, but at least they were moving away from open ground. As they walked, the girl began to speak in broken human words, telling him small pieces of her story. She said her name was Leary. Her home had been attacked by off-world soldiers, and her family scattered. She had been running when she fell into the river. She didn't say how long she had been drifting before Ethan found her. Ethan listened but asked few questions. He could tell every word cost her effort. When her voice faded into silence, he felt her head grow heavier against his shoulder. She was falling asleep, even while clinging to him. For a moment, he thought about leaving her in a hidden place until the danger passed. But when he shifted slightly, her arms tightened around his neck as if sensing his thought. It was clear she had no intention of letting go. Not now, maybe not ever. Ethan sighed softly and adjusted his hold. Somehow he knew that saving her had tied their lives together in a way he didn't yet understand, and deep down, he also knew that whatever hunted her would soon be hunting him too. The rain had slowed, but the mist over the wetlands was thicker than before. It clung to the ground and wrapped around the tall reeds, hiding what lay ahead. Ethan moved quickly but carefully, his boots sinking into the soft earth with each step. Leary was still in his arms, her small body warm against his chest. Her breathing was steady now, but her arms remained locked around his neck. She had not let go since the moment he pulled her from the river. Ethan's mind kept replaying the sight of the drones above the water. Whoever they belonged to, they were not here for anything good. He could feel in his gut that the girl was important. Important enough for someone to send machines to find her. And if they caught her, she would not survive. A faint hum returned. Carried through the fog, Ethan stopped instantly, listening. The sound was growing louder, the same deep vibration he had heard before. Leary's head lifted slightly from his shoulder, her star-shaped pupils widening. "They are close," she whispered, her voice shaking. Ethan glanced around, searching for a hiding place. To his left, a patch of the ground dipped into a shallow trench covered with thick reeds. He crouched low, slipping into the trench, the wet plants brushing cold water onto his face. The hum of the drones grew so loud he could almost feel it in his bones. Through a gap in the reeds, he saw 3 dark shapes gliding through the mist. Their red scanning lights swept back and forth like hunting eyes. Ethan lowered his head, his heart pounding. Leary pressed herself closer against him, her hands clutching his jacket like claws. One of the drones hovered just above the trench. Ethan held his breath. The red light passed over them once, twice then, as if losing interest. It drifted away to join the others. When the sound finally faded, Ethan allowed himself a slow breath. He stood and began moving again, faster this time. The trench curved and led them deeper into the wetlands. Water splashed around his boots. But the ground here was firm enough to keep going. After some time, they reached a cluster of giant root-like trees rising from the water. Their twisted shapes formed a natural wall, and in the middle was a hollow space like a hidden room. Ethan slipped inside, setting Leary down for the first time since pulling her from the river. She stayed close, watching him with those bright alien eyes. For a moment, it was almost quiet, just the sound of dripping water and distant wind. Then Leary spoke, her voice low. "My people. We have no word for friend," she said slowly. "We only have forever." Ethan frowned, unsure what she meant. "In our way," she continued. "When someone saves your life, you belong to them. And they belong to you." Ethan didn't know how to respond. He wasn't sure he wanted anyone belonging to him, especially when he was already in danger. But before he could speak, a sudden splash echoed from somewhere outside the roots. He tensed, motioning for her to stay silent. Through a narrow gap, he saw movement in the mist. Not drones this time, but figures on foot. They were tall, wearing dark armor that glinted faintly in the dim light. Alien soldiers, their weapons held ready. Ethan's stomach tightened. He knew they were looking for her. One of them raised a device that projected a wide scanning beam over the water. Ethan took Leary's hand and moved toward the back of the root cluster. There was a narrow passage leading deeper into the swamp, half covered by hanging vines. They slipped through, the water rising to Ethan's knees. Behind them, the soldiers' voices grew sharper. Urgent, the chase was on. Ethan pushed forward, weaving between thick tree roots and patches of reeds. Leary struggled to keep up, so he lifted her again and kept moving. The sound of splashing footsteps followed them through the fog. A sudden shot of red light streaked past Ethan's shoulder, hitting the water with a hiss. They had been seen. He ducked low, using the uneven ground to shield them. Another beam of light cut through the mist, striking a tree trunk and burning a hole through the bark. Leary buried her face in his chest, trembling. Ethan spotted a fallen tree stretched across a deeper channel of water. Without slowing, he climbed onto it and ran across, balancing. The wet wood shifted under his feet. Behind them, the soldiers splashed into the channel, slowed by the deeper water. That gave Ethan the lead he needed. Once across, he dove into a wall of tall reeds, forcing a path through until they emerged into another open stretch. The mist was thinner here, and in the distance, Ethan saw what looked like an old, abandoned shelter. It was small and broken, but it might be enough to hide them for the night. He headed for it, his breath coming hard. When they reached the shelter, he set Leary down again. Her hands still gripped his jacket, refusing to let go, even after all the running, all the danger. She looked at him with the same steady gaze and whispered, "Forever." Ethan didn't answer, but inside, he felt the weight of that word settle in his chest. He had a feeling that no matter what happened next, this chase was only the beginning. Small shelter looked like it had been abandoned for years. Its walls were made from old planks, some warped and broken, its roof sagging under the weight of moss and water. Ethan pushed the door gently, and it creaked open with a slow groan. Inside, the air was damp but warmer than outside. A single broken chair leaned in the corner, and a pile of old fishing nets lay tangled on the floor. The scent of river mud and wood filled the space. Ethan guided Leary inside and closed the door behind them. For the first time since pulling her from the river, he saw her release her grip on his jacket. But she didn't step away. She stood close, her bright eyes watching every move he made. Ethan found a dry patch near the back wall and sat down. His pack, from it, he pulled a small emergency blanket, silver on one side and soft on the other. He wrapped it around her, tucking the corners so it wouldn't slip off. She shivered still, but less than before. Her glowing skin reflected faintly in the dim light seeping through the cracks in the walls. "Better?" he asked, his voice calm. She nodded, then whispered, "Better." "With you." The words caught him off guard. He cleared his throat and turned to start a small fire. There was a rusted old stove in the corner, its chimney pipe bent but still attached. He gathered bits of dry wood from under the nets and lit them with his pocket lighter. A faint orange glow filled the room. Leary crouched close to it, holding her hands toward the heat, her eyes half closing. Ethan studied her quietly. She was still so young, but there was something in her expression, a weight, a sadness, that didn't belong to a child. After a while, she spoke again. Her voice soft. "My people. They are gone," she said. "Taken, or dead." Ethan didn't answer right away. He had learned that sometimes silence was kinder than words. She looked down at her glowing wrists, the faint patterns moving slowly beneath her skin. "In my world," she said, "when someone saves you, they become your forever." She touched the markings as she spoke. "This is the promise mark." Ethan frowned slightly. "Promise mark?" She nodded. "It means I belong to you, and you belong to me." He leaned back, not sure what to make of that. He had saved lives before, but no one had ever said it meant something permanent. Still looking at her, shivering in that worn blanket, he knew leaving her wasn't an option. Outside, the sound of rain faded, replaced by the distant call of night creatures. Somewhere in the darkness, the hum of a drone passed by, slow and searching. Ethan moved to the window and peered out through a gap in the wall. A red light swept across the marsh, pausing for a moment before moving on. "They will keep looking," Leary whispered. "They will not stop." Her voice was calm, but her hands gripped the edge of the blanket tightly. Ethan stepped back and sat down near the fire. "We'll move at dawn," he said. "Too dangerous in the dark." She nodded and curled up beside the stove, her eyes closing. But even in sleep, her hands reached for him, fingers brushing his arm as if to make sure he was still there. Ethan leaned back against the wall, watching the flicker of the fire. His thoughts kept drifting to the strange glow of her skin, the way she had called him her forever. He didn't know why that word stayed with him. It felt heavier than any promise he had made before. Hours passed slowly, the fire burning low. Ethan stayed awake, listening to every sound outside. The splash of water, the distant rustle of reeds. He knew the soldiers or drones could appear at any moment. But in that small, broken shelter, for a little while, there was a fragile sense of safety. When dawn finally came, pale it filtered through the cracks in the walls. Ethan stood, stretching stiff muscles. He packed his blanket and gear, then crouched to wake Leary. Her eyes opened slowly, and she blinked up at him, a faint smile on her lips. "Still here," she murmured, as if surprised he had not left. "Still here," he replied, and as they stepped out of the shelter into the misty morning, he knew those words might have to be true for a very long time. The morning air was cold and heavy with mist. Ethan stepped out of the shelter first, scanning the wetlands before letting Leary follow. The ground was soft under their boots, every step leaving deep prints in the mud. A pale sun hung low behind the clouds, offering little warmth. Leary stayed close to him, the emergency blanket now folded over her shoulders like a cloak. Her glowing skin looked dimmer in the daylight, but the promise mark on her wrists still pulsed faintly. They moved quietly, following a narrow trail through the reeds. Ethan knew they had to get across the border into safer territory before the search parties caught up. The border wasn't a wall or a fence. It was a wide stretch of river that marked the end of the invaders' control. If they could cross it, they might have a chance, but crossing also meant risk. The invaders guarded it day and night. After an hour of walking, the trail ended at a cluster of old fishing shacks long abandoned. From there, Ethan could see the border river, a broad, slow-moving expanse of greenish water. On the far bank, the land rose into forested hills. Closer to them, near the water's edge, 2 armored soldiers stood on watch, their weapons slung across their chests. Leary stopped walking, her eyes fixed on the soldiers. "They will see us," she whispered, her voice tense. Ethan crouched beside her, thinking. Then he noticed an old wooden boat tied to one of the shacks. It was half covered in moss, but still floating. "We'll use that," he said quietly. Leary shook her head. "Too open." Ethan pointed to a pile of fishing nets beside the boat. "Not if we hide under those." He led her to the shack, keeping low so the soldiers wouldn't spot them. The boards creaked under their weight, but no alarm came. At the edge of the dock, he lowered her into the boat, then climbed in himself. The wooden planks groaned, but held. He pulled the fishing nets over them, making sure only small gaps remained for air. The nets smelled of damp wood and river plants, but they would mask their shapes. Ethan used a short paddle to push them away from the dock, letting the current take them downstream toward the crossing. Through the gaps in the net, Leary watched the soldiers grow closer. One of them glanced toward the water, then away. Her small hand gripped Ethan's arm under the net. The boat drifted slowly, rocking with the current. When they reached the soldiers' position, Ethan kept his head low and moved the paddle only when necessary. One soldier stepped closer to the bank. Scanning the water, Ethan felt his heart pound. The man's gaze swept over the boat, paused for a moment, then shifted to something upriver. He turned and spoke to the other soldier. Pointing toward the sound of a distant splash, Ethan took the chance and pushed the paddle hard, letting the current carry them past. Within minutes, the soldiers were behind them, hidden by the curve of the river. Ethan let out a slow breath. "We made it past them," he whispered. Leary looked at him, her star-shaped pupils wide. Her voice was barely a murmur. "Because you are clever." The boat drifted toward a small inlet on the far side of the river. Ethan steered them in and pulled the boat onto the muddy shore. He stepped out first, then helped her onto solid ground. They were across. The forest here was thick, the air cooler and filled with the scent of damp leaves. Leary wrapped her blanket tighter around herself. "This place feels safe," she said softly. Ethan glanced at her, then back toward the river. "It's safer," he replied. "Not safe." They walked into the forest, following a faint path made by animals. Bird-like calls echoed from high in the trees. Every few steps, Ethan checked behind them. The border river was now hidden by the thick trunks and hanging vines. Leary walked beside him now, her small hand occasionally brushing his. After a while, she spoke again. "You could have left me in the shelter." Ethan looked at her and shook his head. "Not my way," she tilted her head. "Then what is your way?" He didn't answer right away, but when he did, his voice was steady. "My way is to keep my word." She studied him for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "You are my forever," she said again, as if reminding him. Ethan didn't respond, but he felt the truth of it settle deeper inside him. As the forest path twisted ahead, he knew they had crossed more than just a river. They had crossed into something neither of them could walk away from. The forest had grown darker as the day faded. Tall trees loomed overhead, their thick leaves blocking most of the light. Ethan moved quickly but carefully, his eyes scanning the shadows. Leary stayed close behind him, her small footsteps almost silent on the damp ground. The forest felt different here, too quiet. No birds, no rustle of small animals, only the faint sound of wind moving through the high branches. Ethan's instincts told him they were being followed. It started as a feeling, then came the proof. The faint hum returned, but now it was mixed with the soft crunch of boots on leaves. Leary's hand slipped into his, her fingers tightening. "They found us," she whispered. Ethan didn't reply, but he pulled her behind a thick tree trunk, through the gap between the roots. He saw dark figures moving through the forest. 3 soldiers in black armor, each carrying a sleek energy rifle. Their helmets glowed faintly with targeting lenses, scanning the undergrowth. Ethan knew running would only delay them. Sooner or later, they would close in. He looked at Leary, her eyes wide but steady. "We end this now," he said quietly. She shook her head. "They are too strong." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Strong doesn't mean unstoppable." He guided her to a hollow under a fallen tree, its roots forming a tangled wall. "Stay here, no matter what," he told her. She caught his sleeve. "You will come back?" He met her gaze. "Always." Then he slipped away into the shadows, moving toward the sound of the soldiers. The forest floor was soft and silent under his boots. He circled wide, keeping low, until he was behind them. The first soldier passed. Within a few steps, his weapon scanning ahead, Ethan grabbed a thick branch from the ground and swung it hard. The blow caught the soldier in the side of the helmet, sending him sprawling into the mud before the others could turn. Ethan was already moving, using the trees as cover. Shots from their rifles lit the dark forest with red flashes. Bark splintered around him, but none of the blasts hit. He ducked behind a thick trunk, pulling a small metal sphere from his pocket. A smoke charge he had carried since his last job. He rolled it across the ground toward them. A hiss filled the air, and within seconds, thick white smoke curled upward. The soldiers shouted to each other, their vision blocked. Ethan moved fast, striking the second soldier's weapon and sending it flying into the undergrowth. They grappled briefly, the soldier's armor heavy, but slowing him. Ethan slammed him into a tree, knocking the wind from his lungs. The third soldier fired blindly into the smoke. Ethan ducked, grabbed a handful of wet dirt, and hurled it at the glowing visor. The soldier stumbled back, trying to clear his sight. Ethan closed the distance and drove his shoulder into the man's chest, sending him crashing into the mud. The smoke began to thin, revealing the 3 soldiers sprawled on the forest floor. Ethan didn't wait for them to recover. He took the closest rifle, checked its charge, and aimed it at the ground between them. "Stay down," he growled. The soldiers froze. Perhaps realizing they were beaten for now, Ethan backed away, keeping the weapon steady until the distance grew. He turned and ran for Leary's hiding place. She was crouched in the hollow, eyes wide as she saw him emerge from the smoke. "You came back," she breathed. "Always," he said again, helping her out. But the fight wasn't over. In the distance, more drones buzzed through the air, drawn by the sound of the battle. Ethan knew they wouldn't have long before reinforcements arrived. He grabbed her hand, and they ran deeper into the forest. The path narrowed, leading to a rocky slope that overlooked a rushing stream. Across the stream was a narrow ledge that curved around a cliff. If they could reach it, the pursuers would have to slow down. Ethan lifted Leary and carried her across, the cold water soaking his legs. When they reached the other side, he turned to see the first drones breaking through the trees. He fired a quick burst from the stolen rifle, hitting one and sending it spinning into the stream. The others hesitated, giving him precious seconds. They reached the ledge and followed it until the forest opened into a hidden clearing. Here, the air was calmer, the sound of water softer. As Ethan stopped to catch his breath, Leary looked up at him, her glowing markings brighter than before. "You fight for me," she said, almost like a question. Ethan nodded. "I promised." She reached out and touched his arm. "Then I am yours, forever." Her voice carried no fear now, only certainty. Ethan looked back toward the forest edge, knowing the danger wasn't gone. But in that moment, he also knew they had survived the worst of it together. The clearing was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt almost strange after the chase. Ethan stood still, listening for any sound of the soldiers or drones. Only the soft rush of the nearby stream and the rustle of leaves in the wind reached his ears. Leary stayed close to him, her small hand gripping his. Her breathing was calm now, but she kept glancing over her shoulder as if expecting danger to return. Ethan guided her toward the far side of the clearing where a fallen tree made a natural bench. They sat together, the damp wood cool beneath them. For a while neither spoke. Ethan was thinking about the road ahead, where to go, how to keep her hidden. Leary was watching him, her bright alien eyes following every movement. Finally she broke the silence, her voice soft. "You could leave me here," she said. "It would be safer for you." Ethan turned his head, meeting her gaze. "I'm not leaving you," he said simply. Her expression didn't change, but the promise mark on her wrists seemed to glow a little brighter. "In my people's way," she said. "You are now my forever." She lifted her wrist so the mark caught the light filtering through the leaves. "It is not just words. It is life." Ethan looked at the glowing patterns, remembering the first time he had noticed them back by the river. "They can't take you back to them," he said, meaning the soldiers. "They will try," she replied quietly. "They will always try." That was the truth they both knew. The promise mark meant something deeper than protection. It meant a bond that would not break. Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I don't know where this path ends," he admitted, "but I'll walk it with you." Her head tilted slightly, a faint smile touching her lips. "That is all I need," she said. The sky above the clearing had started to clear, the sun breaking through in soft golden beams. For the first time since the storm, light warmed their faces. Ethan stood and offered her his hand. "We should keep moving," he said. "Find a place where they won't look." She took his hand without hesitation. They followed the stream deeper into the forest, moving in silence. The path wound through thick roots and moss-covered stones. After some time, they reached a ridge that looked down over a valley. In the distance, nestled between hills, was a small human outpost. Smoke curled from chimneys, and a few figures moved between wooden buildings. Ethan studied it for a moment. It was risky. More people meant more eyes, and word could spread. But it also meant food, shelter, and maybe allies. Leary followed his gaze. "Will they be kind?" she asked. "Some will," he said honestly. "Some won't." Her small hand tightened around his. "Then I will stay close." They made their way down the ridge, moving carefully until they reached the edge of the outpost. A few humans stopped to stare. They had likely never seen someone like Leary before. Ethan ignored the looks and led her to a quiet corner where an older woman stood behind a stall selling bread. He traded a few coins for 2 small loaves. Handing one to Leary, she held it for a moment, as if unsure what to do. "Eat," he said gently. She took a bite, her eyes widening at the taste. A faint laugh escaped her, the first sound of joy he had heard from her. They found an empty building. At the edge of the outpost, its door hanging open. Inside it was dusty but dry. Ethan closed the door and set his pack down. "This will do for tonight," he said. Leary sat cross-legged on the floor, finishing her bread. When she was done, she moved closer to him, her expression serious. "In my people's way, the promise must be sealed," she said. She pressed her glowing wrist markings against his. The light from her skin flared softly, spreading across both their wrists like liquid silver. Ethan felt a strange warmth where their skin touched. "What does it mean now?" he asked quietly. "It means no distance, no danger, no time will break it," she said. Her voice was steady, certain. Ethan didn't know if he believed in such things, but he knew he wouldn't abandon her. That was enough. She leaned against him, her eyes growing heavy with sleep. Within minutes she was resting against his side, her breathing slow, and even Ethan stayed awake, listening to the faint sounds of the outpost outside. He thought about the journey so far, the storm, the chase, the fights, and he realized that saving her by the river had changed everything. The path ahead was unknown, and danger would come again, but he also knew that whatever happened, he had made a promise he would keep, always.